He looked like any other beggar on the sidewalk, until the police canine refused to leave his side. What was hidden under his jacket? No one was ready for it. Here's the full story, but before you watch, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you're subscribed. The morning rush on Benton Street was like clockwork. Commuters with earbuds and paper cups hurried past crumbling sidewalks, taxis honked in choreographed frustration, and street vendors shouted offers for everything from hot coffee to knockoff sunglasses. In this rhythm, few things stood out, except for the police cruiser idling near the edge of the intersection. Inside sat Officer Jason Merrill and his canine partner, Shadow, a 6-year-old German Shepherd known across the precinct for his calm under pressure. Shadow had sniffed out narcotics buried in floorboards, found 2 missing children last fall, and once located a fugitive hiding inside an HVAC shaft. He didn't spook easily. He didn't bark for no reason. That's what made the moment so strange. They were just completing their usual patrol circuit when Shadow suddenly stiffened in the back seat. Ears up, eyes forward, Jason looked in the rear view. Shadow. The dog didn't move. Then came the growl, low, sharp, controlled. It wasn't fear, it wasn't play. It was the sound he made when something was wrong. Jason pulled the cruiser to the curb. Shadow barked. Once, then again, louder. And then he lunged toward the door, pawing at the handle as though trying to get out himself. Jason opened the rear latch. The second the door swung open, Shadow launched forward. Not in a sprint, not recklessly, but in a direct line across the street, weaving through foot traffic until he stopped dead center in front of a man slouched against a lamppost. The man was wrapped in a patchwork coat layered with rags and faded flannel. A wide-brimmed hat obscured most of his face. A worn paper cup sat next to his boot, holding a few crumpled bills and coins. A beggar, or at least that's what he looked like. But Shadow didn't care about the cup or the layers or the hat. He sat and stared, unmoving. That was his strongest alert. Jason's heart picked up. He approached cautiously, hand near his belt, not weapon-ready but prepared. "Sir," he said carefully, "can I speak with you a moment?" The man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe heavier. Jason stepped closer. Shadow didn't budge. "Sir," Jason tried again, "everything okay today?" The man slowly raised his head. Brown beard, sunken eyes, a long scar just above the left brow. His gaze met Jason's but briefly. Then it flicked to Shadow, and for the first time something shifted in his posture. Not fear, recognition. "Nice dog," the man said quietly. Shadow growled again. Jason's instincts kicked in. He asked dispatch for a secondary unit. No sirens, no lights, just backup. "I'm gonna need you to stand up, sir." The man raised both hands slowly. "No problem, officer. Just trying to stay warm." Jason noted the voice too steady, too clean, and something else. The man's jacket was too thick for May, too layered, too deliberate. As the man stood, the jacket fell open slightly. Shadow lunged forward, not to bite, but to press his nose into the man's ribs, and that's when Jason saw it. A thick strap running across the man's chest, disguised but visible for a split second beneath the folds of fabric. Not something a beggar would wear. Something tactical. The streets go still. Within seconds, backup arrived. 2 plainclothes officers flanked the street from behind. Jason stepped in. "Sir, I need you to turn around." The man complied slowly, even raising his hands again, but his expression had changed. He wasn't trying to run. He wasn't going to fight. He was waiting. The jacket was removed, carefully. What they found beneath it didn't belong to any street beggar. Underneath the patchwork layers were 2 compact electronics, flat, rectangular, wired with what looked like signal nodes. Hidden under an inner vest taped close to the body were a folded set of credentials, a long list of handwritten names, and a small black device about the size of a pager. Jason stared. "What is this?" one officer whispered. No answer. The man just stood there, hands out. "I want a lawyer." The unfolding begins. Back at the station, the electronics were removed, scanned, and flagged. One of them was a short-range burst jammer just like the one Rocco had found inside the bank weeks ago. The black device? Encrypted, not explosive, not reactive, but data-capable. Tech teams couldn't access it, not yet, but a string of numbers etched into its frame matched part of a serial code found in a federal anti-espionage bulletin. Jason watched through the glass as the man sat in silence, refusing every question. Fingerprints gave no results. Retina scan came back blank. No priors, no trace. But when a second officer ran the fake Beggar's photo through facial mapping software, one hit came back from an international database flagged by U.S. intelligence. Suspected foreign operative. Name unknown. Alias Caleb Shore. Last seen Istanbul 2021. Affiliation unknown. Current status considered active and highly adaptive. Jason turned to Shadow, who lay calmly beneath the bench, eyes still on the interrogation room. "You knew," he whispered, "because whatever this man had come to do, he'd nearly pulled it off, until a dog wouldn't walk away." That evening, as night fell over Lancaster Falls, a federal vehicle arrived unannounced. Agents stepped inside and asked for the device. No explanations were given, only a file, thin, marked with a single symbol. A compass fractured through the middle. Inside were names, dates, surveillance logs from across several counties, and one phrase circled in red: "Verify Operation Echo Stagger." No one knew what it meant. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something deeper, and it started with a beggar who wasn't a beggar, and a dog who refused to move. The file left behind by the federal agents had barely cooled on the desk before Officer Jason Merrill began going through it page by page. The symbol on the folder, a fractured compass, was unfamiliar, but the contents told a story louder than any official statement, and it was a story Lancaster Falls wasn't ready to hear. Shadow, his canine partner, sat in the corner of the precinct's conference room. Calm, watchful, waiting like he always did when something wasn't finished. And this wasn't finished, because now everything pointed to a single phrase left in the file: "Verify Operation Echo Stagger." No one in the department had ever heard of it. No hits on government databases, no matching terminology in joint task force records. But buried deep within the file was a list of street intersections, seemingly random at first: Hollow and King, Benton and Sycamore, Grandview and Ninth. All locations within Lancaster Falls, all places Jason had patrolled in the past 2 weeks, and all sites where he now realized Shadow had hesitated, not barked, not growled, hesitated, as if sensing something that hadn't revealed itself yet. The pattern beneath the calm. Jason spread a local map on the table and began marking each intersection with red ink. The pins didn't make a circle or a square, they didn't form a border. They made a path, a curving, deliberate line across the town, ending at the county communications tower just beyond the city limit. The same tower that controlled not just radio but local digital infrastructure, city surveillance, emergency alerts, and the secure feed used by law enforcement. Shadow stirred as Jason's pen stopped at the tower. Was it coincidence? Or had the man disguised as a beggar known only by the alias Caleb Shore been following this path for a reason? At 11 a.m., Jason returned to the interrogation room. Caleb sat with hands folded, face blank, eyes narrowed but not unfriendly, like he was waiting for someone to catch up. Jason placed the file on the table. "You want to talk now?" Caleb smiled faintly. "I already have. You just haven't learned to listen." The silence that spoke too loud. Meanwhile, federal tech teams continued examining the encrypted black device pulled from under Caleb's jacket. The device refused to crack. Standard software couldn't access its core directory, until Shadow growled at the table where it sat. Jason watched from the glass as the dog's posture shifted again, nose twitching near the device, tail rigid. He walked in. "What is it, boy?" Shadow moved around the table, head tilting toward the underside. Jason turned the device over. That's when he saw it. Not a USB port, not a charging socket, but a small biometric sensor, touch-activated. The device required a specific skin signature. Jason turned toward the one man who hadn't said a word in hours. Get him in here." Caleb was led in, still cuffed, still silent. When they placed his thumb on the sensor, the device blinked. 3 files unlocked. Inside were 2 sets of coordinates, a live feed connection log, and a single tight TXT file titled Echo Trigger Failsafe. Jason opened it. It read, "In the event of compromise, secure a relay sequence via embedded drop network. Initiate fallback at node 5. Do not expose internal handler. Trigger echo stagger by interference Q non-human detection." Jason froze. Non-human detection. They weren't just expecting someone to alert them. They were counting on a dog to interrupt them. Shadow had been factored in. Targeted. The handler? Still unknown. The plan buried in the daylight. By that afternoon, a new piece of intel arrived. Security footage pulled from a parking structure near Benton and Sycamore, one of the marked intersections. It showed a city employee ID badge being swiped against a maintenance door. Time, 2:14 a.m., same date. Shadow had paused at that intersection. The badge belonged to a man named Ronan Nash, a subcontracted systems analyst with temporary city access clearance. Clean record, no red flag. But when officers went to his listed address, it was empty. No personal effects, no clothes, no digital trail, except for one thing: a plastic crate left in the living room with 3 words written in marker across the top. Echo doesn't sleep. Inside were encrypted drives, a folded city infrastructure map with fiber line routes highlighted, and an ID badge bearing a different name, Langley Morris. The same face, different name, just like Caleb Shore. The realization that cut deeper. Jason returned to the precinct that night, the pieces swirling, multiple identities, mapped locations, dead relay points embedded into quiet intersections, a command structure with no visible leaders, and Shadow, the only living being who had consistently disrupted their pattern. He wasn't chasing criminals anymore. He was interfering with a network. Every place Shadow barked, data dropped offline for a moment. It had taken them weeks to realize it, but Shadow's alerts weren't just instinct. They were disrupting a silent chain of digital transfers no one else even noticed. They had tried to isolate him. They had tried to jam his environment, and when that failed, they planted Caleb Shore where they thought Shadow would detect him. To test the final failsafe. To trigger Echo Stagger, a system that could corrupt internal feeds, erase records, and redirect suspicion likely toward Jason himself. And they were close, but they hadn't accounted for one final alert. The final ping. At 2:37 a.m., Shadow barked inside the precinct. Once, then again, harder. Jason ran out. The alert wasn't from a call, it was inside the station. Shadow bolted down the hallway and stopped in front of the archive server room. Locked. But someone had accessed it 5 minutes earlier. A janitor. Jason called in a lockdown. When they entered, the room was empty except for the open server panel and a single missing drive, but on the ground, caught under the cooling vent, a utility key card. It bore the city logo, and the name? Officer Greg Halden. Internal Affairs would later confirm Halden had requested backup drive access 2 weeks earlier, had worked late nights without logging time, and had quietly placed Jason under observation after the Caleb arrest. He wasn't the handler, he was inside the circle, and he had just disappeared. The sun barely touched the edges of Lancaster Falls as Officer Jason Merrill sat in his cruiser, watching the precinct through the rearview mirror. His K9 partner Shadow lay curled beside the gear shift, head up, eyes alert, as if sensing what Jason had already concluded. The operation wasn't over. It had just changed shape. With Officer Greg Halden vanished, his key card used to access the internal servers moments before Shadow's bark. The town wasn't looking for a fugitive anymore. They were watching for someone who had been part of the team all along, and no one knew how many more were part of it. A pattern, hidden in trust. Internal Affairs combed through Halden's assignments. His logs had been clean, suspiciously so. He'd volunteered for night shifts, quiet corners, archive duties. No complaints, no conflicts. But when the tech division pulled server access history, something emerged. He hadn't just copied logs from the day of Caleb Shore's arrest. He had copied every incident file involving Shadow, dozens of K9 alerts ranging from narcotics detection to building searches, and removed them from backup servers. They were rerouted to a private off-site address. When the system traced the data's endpoint, one address pinged. 212 Havenstone Drive, a suburban home listed as abandoned 2 years ago after a foreclosure. Jason tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He and Shadow were already moving before the search team was even deployed. Because if this was what he thought it wasn't just surveillance. It was a signal rewrite hub, the house that should not be lit. They arrived quietly, no sirens, no backup. Jason parked half a block away, approached with Shadow at his side. The house looked dark from the street, but around back, just beyond a broken fence, was a faint blue glow from a basement window. Shadow stiffened, ears perked. He growled low. Jason knelt and touched his shoulder. The light meant power, which meant activity. They moved in. The side door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. Computers running. Down the stairs, the blue light expanded. The basement had been gutted and refitted with servers, desks, laptops, cooling racks, and on one screen streaming live was a direct feed of the Lancaster Falls Police Department's own internal cam system. It wasn't just about copying data anymore. It was about controlling the lens. Shadow barked loud and sudden. Jason spun. At the far end of the room, hidden behind a privacy divider, a shadow moved. He stepped forward slowly, weapon drawn, and there stood Officer Halden. No expression, no panic, only a quiet click as he shut down the monitor with one keystroke. "You were never supposed to see this," he said, "the truth beneath the uniform." Halden didn't fight, he didn't run, he just stood as Jason cuffed him, eyes steady, voice flat. "It was never about the town. It's what the town's connected to. What does that mean?" Jason asked. "You'll see, but not here." In Halden's back pocket was a second key card. Embedded inside, an RFID chip labeled Echo Node, Phase 2 ARM. Back at the precinct, tech teams traced the chip's access permissions. It didn't just allow entry to the police station, it allowed override to every security layer in the town's municipal network. Traffic, power, emergency dispatch, digital locks, even evidence chain of custody logs. Halden had been building it for years, using the department's own infrastructure as a bridge for a wider network. A network already connected to sites outside Lancaster Falls. One of them, the same transit terminal where Rocco Karajensen's K9 had made his alert weeks earlier. It wasn't one town, it was a grid. And the dogs had been the only ones to cross the lines and recognize the scent trails. Shadow's alerts were never local. They brought in federal analysts the next morning. The files pulled from Halden's systems painted a terrifying picture. Each K9 alert was more than a signal. It was a disruption. Dogs like Shadow had unknowingly interfered with encrypted relay handoffs, tiny physical cues no human could have picked up, pheromone residue, hidden RF tags, coded scent packets attached to objects or clothing, and every time a dog like Shadow barked, that loop failed. Each alert forced the system to reset, and when too many resets occurred, the network behind the operation started flagging the dog. They had tried to neutralize Rocco. They had planted Caleb Shore for Shadow. There were likely others across the country, each town chosen for its silence, each K9 treated as an unmonitored variable, until they weren't. The final piece, what Shadow really stopped. Later that afternoon, Jason reviewed the files flagged as pending activation phase 2. Inside was a timer, set to go live the day after Caleb's arrest. The signal would have rewritten access credentials across the region's digital grid, allowing backdoor entry to courthouse systems, police server rooms, even election roll software. And the activation point, Lancaster Falls. Chosen because no one would suspect it. A town built on routine, but one dog had broken the rhythm. And now the signal was broken too. The aftermath. Officer Halden was transferred into federal custody. His connection to AeroSync defense systems was confirmed through financial records. Payments routed through shell nonprofits, silent, consistent, invisible. Caleb Shore, whose real name was never released, remained in black site custody. The message was clear: there were others. Jason stood in the K-9 unit office days later, watching shadows sniff the corners of the room. Calm now, but never distracted. The department issued no press release, no public explanation. But within internal files, a note was added to Shadow's record. Subject classified as Tier 1 interference asset. Unintentional disruptor of compromised grid. Monitoring advised. Shadow didn't know that, but he knew something had changed. Because when Jason grabbed his leash the next morning, Shadow didn't wait. He moved first, as if he already knew where the next alert would come from. If one bark could unravel all that, just imagine what the next alert could reveal. Stories like this don't come around often, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite K-9's name, and make sure you're subscribed so you're the first to know when things break wide open.